Lily Holt ironed her own dress that morning. Her mother had offered standing in the kitchen doorway in her courthouse uniform, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. The particular exhaustion of a single parent already visible in her eyes at 7:15 in the morning. But Lily had shaken her head and carried the small iron carefully to the bathroom counter, the only flat surface she could reach without a step stool, and pressed the yellow cotton smooth herself. Every button, every seam. The sunflower she had drawn on the left toe of her white canvas sneaker 2 months ago in red marker had started to fade at the edges, so she traced over it again before she put the shoe on slow and deliberate, the way she did everything that mattered. She was 8 years old. She understood more than anyone gave her credit for. That is the first thing you need to understand about Lily Holt. Not the yellow dress, not the courthouse steps, not the 11 seconds that would change the course of her life and the lives of people she had never met. The first thing you need to understand is that Lily Holt was not a child who stumbled into danger. She was a child who saw danger coming from 11 weeks away, told the adults who were supposed to protect her, and when those adults looked the other way, she made a plan. She was 8 years old, and she made a plan. That plan was pressed flat in the yellow dress. It was traced over in the sunflower on her left shoe. It had been practiced in the bathroom mirror every night for 6 of those 11 weeks, standing on the cold tile in her socks, raising her left hand to her sternum, tucking her thumb into her palm, folding 4 fingers down over it, holding for 3 seconds, then lowering her hand, over and over, until the motion lived in her muscle memory the way breathing did, until she could do it without thinking, until she could do it while her face stayed completely terrifyingly calm. Because Lily Holt had understood something that most adults spend their entire lives refusing to believe, that the moment you need help most is exactly the moment your voice is most likely to fail you. And so you prepare something that does not need a voice. She had learned the signal 8 months before the courthouse steps. A police officer named Sergeant Demby had come to Harlan County Primary School in January for a personal safety presentation. He was a large man with a patient voice and a slideshow that most of the third graders found boring. Lily had sat in the second row and watched his hands when he demonstrated. Thumb tucked, 4 fingers folded, 3 seconds. He called it the rescue signal. He said it came from a domestic violence awareness campaign and had spread into schools and community programs across the country. He said if you were ever in a situation where you could not speak, where someone was watching you too closely, where screaming would make things worse instead of better, this was how you asked for help without words. Most of the class forgot it by lunch. Lily went home and practiced it in the bathroom mirror until dinner. She did not know in January why the signal felt so important. She did not know yet about Greer Whitfield. She did not know about Thursdays or the community center, or the way a man in a collared polo shirt could build a cage around a child so slowly and so carefully that the child did not realize the bars were there until the door was already closed. She just knew the signal mattered. The way she knew things sometimes in the quiet part of her chest that adults call the imagination, but that Lily understood as something older and more reliable than that. Greer Whitfield appeared at the Harlan County Community Center on a Thursday afternoon in late June. Lily noticed him the same way she noticed everything, quietly from a distance, filing the information away without drawing attention to the fact that she was filing it. He was 47 years old, medium height, the kind of unremarkable that took effort. Khaki pants pressed sharp, collared polo shirt in a color that suggested calm, hair cut close and neat, glasses with thin frames that made him look like someone's trusted uncle, someone who showed up to help with homework and remembered birthdays and never raised his voice. He introduced himself to the staff with a folder of credentials and a smile that arrived slightly before the words did. Licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizon Youth Services, 9 years working with the Georgia Department of Child and Family Services, Boy Scout troop volunteer, hospital auxiliary crisis hotline. The kind of resume that made institutional gatekeepers exhale and reach for the sign-in sheet without checking further. The community center director, a woman named Mrs. Parrott, who had been running the after-school program for 16 years and prided herself on knowing every child by name, welcomed him warmly and introduced him to the Thursday afternoon group as a new volunteer helper. Lily watched him from across the room. He smiled at the other children, learned their names quickly, remembered details, asked the right questions in the right tone. He was good at it. She could see that. The performance was smooth in the way that only very practiced things are smooth. But there was something underneath the smoothness. She could not have named it at 8 years old. She did not have the vocabulary for what she was sensing. What she had was the feeling. The specific particular feeling of something being not right, in a way she could not explain to anyone who had not already felt it themselves. The feeling of a frequency slightly off. A note played in a chord where it did not belong. She came home that Thursday and told her mother. Nora Holt listened with the half attention of a woman who had been on her feet since 7 in the morning, processing records at the Harlan County Courthouse, and still had dinner to make, and a permission slip to sign, and a check engine light that had been on for 6 weeks she could not afford to fix. She heard Lily say the new helper gave her a weird feeling. She said, "Sweetheart, sometimes new people feel strange at first." She said, "Give him a chance." She smoothed Lily's hair and asked if she wanted macaroni or soup. Lily said macaroni. She did not bring it up again with her mother. The following Thursday, she told her counselor at the community center, a young woman named Miss Tally, who wore bright earrings and used words like feelings check and safe space, and always crouched down to meet the children at eye level in a way that felt genuine but changed nothing. Miss Tally listened with full attention and a careful expression, and then explained that Mr. Whitfield had excellent references had been fully vetted by the center's administration, and that sometimes our feelings about new people could be connected to other worries in our lives. She asked Lily if there was anything going on at home she wanted to talk about. Lily said no. She walked out of that conversation understanding something she was not old enough to articulate but old enough to know. That credentials were a kind of armor, that a man with the right paperwork in the right folder was invisible in a way that a child's instinct could not penetrate, not when the adults holding the doors had already decided the paperwork was enough. So she stopped telling people about the feeling, and she started watching Whitfield more carefully instead. Over the following weeks, she catalogued things. The way he positioned himself near the door when the program ended each Thursday, casually never blocking it, just present in a way that let him observe who was picked up, and when, and by whom. The way he learned the children's routines with the patient thoroughness of someone doing research, rather than building relationships. The way he asked questions that sounded friendly but gathered information. What time does your mom get off work? Does your dad pick you up too sometimes? Do you walk home or wait for a ride? Lily answered his questions with half-truths and watched his eyes when she answered. She had learned from years of watching adults manage difficult conversations that the eyes stayed honest even when the voice was performing. His eyes stayed very busy when she answered. On the third Thursday of August, Lily was sitting on the front steps of the community center waiting for her mother at 5:45, 15 minutes before Nora's courthouse shift ended, when she saw Whitfield in the parking lot beside his car. He was on the phone. His back was mostly to her. The afternoon was warm and still, and sound carried. She did not move. She barely breathed. She heard him say the audit request came through records. I know who processed it. A pause. He was listening. Then the paperwork goes back through the same office. Another pause. Then in a voice that dropped half a register and lost the warmth completely. The woman has a daughter. Thursdays. That is why Kate Mercer did not go anywhere. Lily did not know what an audit was. She did not know what it meant for paperwork to go through an office. She did not know who Kate Mercer was, though the name caught in her memory. The way sharp things do lodging somewhere behind her sternum, where she stored things that mattered. What she knew was the voice. The voice that had shed the volunteer warmth and become something else entirely. The voice of a man discussing a problem he had already decided how to solve. The voice of someone talking about her mother, and her not as people, but as variables. She memorized the words exactly, all of them, in order. She went home that afternoon and wrote them on the inside back cover of her math notebook, in her smallest handwriting, then closed the book and put it at the bottom of her backpack. She did not tell anyone, because she already knew what would happen if she did. She had told the counselor, she had told her mother. She had been given warm, reasonable, well-intentioned explanations for why her instincts were probably wrong. His arms carried 22 years of memory in ink names and dates and symbols that meant things only to him and the people who had been there. On the inside of his left wrist, in careful black script, a single word and a date. Eli, March 14th, 2007. He had done 2 tours in the Marines as an explosive ordnance disposal technician before he was 30. He had cleared devices from roads in places where the air itself seemed to be waiting for an excuse to kill you. He had learned to move toward dangerous things with a specific quality of stillness, the absence of theater. The pure directed focus of a man who understood that panic was a luxury and hesitation was a choice, and both of them cost lives. He had been building a file on New Horizon Youth Services for 14 months. Not officially. There was no official capacity in which Rook Callahan built files on anything. What there was a man who had spent 17 years learning how the Georgia foster care system worked from the inside, who had sat in DCFS waiting rooms and read case files and attended every public hearing on child welfare policy that was open to the public, who had made it his quiet and relentless business to understand the specific machinery by which children were failed. Not because anyone asked him to, not because it made him feel better. Because his son Eli had been 6 years old when Rook deployed to his second tour, and Eli had been placed in foster care under New Horizon Youth Services during that deployment. And by the time Rook came home, Eli was gone in a way that the system described in the language of paperwork, but that Rook understood as something the paperwork had never been built to hold. He did not talk about Eli. He carried the name on his wrist and he worked. And the work was the only language he had found that did not break apart when he tried to use it. He was 3 steps from the bottom of the courthouse stairs when the movement caught his peripheral vision. Later, he would try to explain what made him stop and find that the explanation kept arriving incomplete. What he saw was a little girl in a yellow dress walking beside a man in khaki pants. What stopped him was not the dress or the pants or even the grip. He clocked in the next half second, the man's hand on the girl's wrist tight enough to whiten the skin around his fingers. What stopped him first, in the fraction of a second before all of that registered, was the angle of the girl's hand. The specific angle of a small hand making a signal he recognized from a DCFS Child Safety Awareness document he had read 14 months ago. A signal from a domestic violence campaign that had found its way into schools and community programs. A signal that, according to the document, had already saved lives in communities where people had been taught to look for it. But underneath the recognition, something else. Something that hit him before the conscious mind finished processing. The angle of her hand matched the angle of a hand in a photograph he had looked at so many times over 17 years that it had worn grooves into him. The specific image of a small boy's hand, his son's hand, Eli's hand, in the last photograph anyone had taken of Eli before everything went wrong. The photograph had lived on his phone, and before that in his wallet, and before that in his breast pocket through 2 deployments, and he had looked at it so many times that the looking had become a kind of conversation he was having with something that could not answer back. The angle was the same. Grief recognizes grief. Loss had taught him to see what safety had made everyone else miss. Rook's hand went to the courthouse railing, not for balance. He did not need balance. He needed 1 second. 1 second to let what had just hit him settle into something he could act on, rather than something that paralyzed him. 1 second for the grief to become purpose the way it had learned to do over 17 years of practice. He counted what he saw in the next 4 seconds: the grip on her wrist, the rigidity in her shoulders, the specific tension of a child who was not struggling because she had already calculated that struggling would make things worse. The fractional sweep of her head, her eyes moving across the courthouse square, in the controlled, desperate scan of someone looking for anyone at all. And the man beside her, moving at the steady, purposeful pace of someone who had done this before and knew that speed attracted attention and calm was the better camouflage. 15 feet from the post office parking lot. On the 5th second, Rook came down the last 3 steps. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved the way 22 years of walking toward things that could kill you had trained him to move, with purpose and without theater, at the pace of a man who happened to be going the same direction, who had just seen someone he recognized, who was in no particular hurry, because hurry was for people who were not in control of the situation. He fell into step beside them with the natural ease of a cousin catching up. "Hey," he said. His voice carried the measured warmth of a man asking for directions. "That your little girl?" The man's head turned. The smile arrived before the words did, practiced and professional. The smile of someone who had answered this question before and knew exactly how to make it go away. "My niece Greer Whitfield said." His voice was smooth and patient, the voice of a tired uncle who loved his family and found the world's concern charming but unnecessary. "Thursdays are our day. Ice cream and the park after. She is at that age where everything is a production, you know how it is." He said it with the precise tone of a man who had calibrated this line against dozens of teachers and social workers and well-meaning strangers, and found the calibration correct. It worked every time. Not because people were foolish, because the line was built to fit the shape of what people wanted to believe: that the world was mostly fine, that men in khaki pants with clean glasses and patient smiles were mostly what they appeared to be. Rook looked at the girl. Her eyes were dark and wide and full of something he had spent 17 years learning to recognize. Not just fear. The specific, exhausted terror of a child who had been trying to be believed for a very long time and had stopped expecting it to work. He went down, right there on the sidewalk, 11 feet from the post office parking lot, with Whitfield standing beside him, calculating his next move, and 11 people continuing to walk past on their separate urgent errands. Rook Callahan dropped to one knee in front of an 8-year-old girl and held out his left hand palm up the inside of his wrist toward the afternoon light. Eli, March 14th, 2007. She looked at the name. He watched her read it, watched her understand in the way children sometimes understood things that adults thought they were hiding, that this man had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and that the weight had taught him something. "I see your signal," he said, just for her, quiet enough that the September air barely carried it. Lily Holt's eyes filled. She did not cry. But something shifted in her face, the particular release of a child who had been holding a terrible tension alone for a very long time and had just been given permission to put part of it down. Her left hand came up, slowly, not the signal this time, just her palm flat against her chest over her heart, checking to make sure it was still there. "He is not my uncle," she said. Her voice was so small the flagpole rope snapping in the September wind almost swallowed it. But Rook heard it. He heard every word that followed. She told him, all of it. The weeks of watching, the counselor who listened and changed nothing, the phone call in the parking lot, the way Whitfield had known her mother's name, her schedule, the fact that Lily waited at the community center on Thursdays, the way he had known all of it before the day she was supposed to disappear. And then she told him the name, Cade Mercer. She said it the same way she had written it in her math notebook and carried it in her backpack for 3 weeks like something sharp and important that she had been waiting to hand to the right person. "I memorized it," she said. "I did not know what it meant." But his voice sounded like he was talking about something he had already decided. and I knew it was bad. Rook's blood went cold. Cade Mercer. He was 16 years old when he filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Department of Child and Family Services in March of 2021. The complaint alleged abuse during his placement under Greer Whitfield's coordination at New Horizon Youth Services. The complaint had been logged assigned to intake and then administratively set aside pending additional documentation that was never specified, never requested, and never received. The complaint was buried. Cade Mercer was 19 years old now. Rook knew this because he had been building a file on New Horizon Youth Services for 14 months, quietly, methodically, in the way a man who had learned to read case files and track institutional patterns did when something in his gut told him an organization that handled vulnerable children and never generated complaints was an organization that made complaints disappear. He had found Cade's name in records. He had not found Cade. He stood, his full height, every inch of it, the presence of a man who had stood in front of things that could kill him and had not flinched, extending that same stillness to this moment. He looked at Greer Whitfield, whose face had gone carefully professionally blank. The charm was still there, but it had moved behind something else now. Calculation. The math of a man trying to determine how much this person knew. Rook pulled his phone from his vest pocket. He did not break eye contact. He pressed 3 buttons. The call connected on the second ring. Ironside, Rook said. His voice was level and quiet and contained everything. I need you at Harlan County Courthouse South Steps right now. Bring everyone you can reach in 10 minutes. Call Carol Staves. Tell her I have a foster care coordinator walking a child to a parking lot, and the child just said Cade Mercer's name to me. A pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice of Rex Pruitt, gravel and steadiness, and 22 years of knowing exactly what certain combinations of words meant. Rolling, Pruitt said. The line went dead. Rook looked at Greer Whitfield. You are not going anywhere, he said. You are going to stand right here with me and this little girl until the people who actually care about her safety arrive. And then you are going to answer a very large number of questions about how a licensed foster care coordinator knows exactly where to find an 8-year-old on a Thursday afternoon. Whitfield's jaw tightened. The mask was slipping at the edges now. Not because Rook was threatening him, because Rook was not threatening him, and Whitfield was experienced enough to understand that the absence of theater was the more serious signal. This is harassment, Whitfield said. His voice had lost the warmth entirely and taken on the measured cadence of a professional preparing a legal defense. I am a licensed coordinator. I have worked with DCFS for 9 years. I have passed every background check this state offers. And you are interfering with a legitimate placement activity. If you do not step back, I will have you arrested for false imprisonment. Rook said nothing. Whitfield's hand tightened on Lily's wrist. The 4 marks deepened. Lily made a small sound, just a breath, barely audible. Rook's voice dropped to something that made the September air feel colder. Let her go. 2 words. No theater. The voice of a man who had stood in front of things that could kill him and had not flinched, and who was extending that same stillness now. Because he had learned that the men who shouted were managing their own fear, and the men who went quiet had already moved past it. Greer Whitfield, licensed foster care coordinator, Boy Scout troop leader, hospital auxiliary volunteer, crisis hotline worker. A man whose entire existence had been built on institutional trust and the assumption that credentials were a kind of permanent protection, looked into the eyes of a Hells Angels chapter president and understood in the way the body understood things before the mind caught up that he had run out of room. His hand opened. Lily stepped back. She stumbled slightly. Rook's hand was already there, steadying her shoulder. The touch was careful and exact, the touch of a man who understood how fragile trust was when it had been broken, and how much worse it would be to break it again now. You're okay, he said quietly. I've got you. The sound started low, distant like weather building on the far side of a ridge. Then it grew. Rook had made one call. Pruitt had made four. The call had gone out with the specific combination of words that among the men who had been riding together for decades required no further explanation. Foster care coordinator. Child. Those words had a weight and a history and a meaning that every man in the Harlan chapter understood in his chest before his brain finished processing the sentence. The first Harley turned onto the street below the courthouse at 6:04. By 6:11, the count was 34. By 6:29, it was 113. Savannah had sent 31. Augusta had sent 27. Men who had been at dinner, at work, in their garages, on their porches, who had dropped what they were doing and gotten on their bikes, without asking any questions beyond the ones already answered by the words foster care coordinator and child. The formation pulled into the courthouse square in disciplined rows, smooth and tight, and practiced from years of riding together. 113 engines cut off in a near unison that left a silence heavier than the sound had been. 113 men in black leather stepped off their bikes and stood, not moving, not shouting, not performing anything, simply present the way a wall is present, the way a fact is present, in a way that required no explanation and admitted no negotiation. Greer Whitfield's face had gone the color of old paper. Rex Pruitt came first, 57 years old. Gray-beard eyes that had spent 22 years as a Harlan County Sheriff's detective, reading the faces of people who had done things they could not undo. He walked up to Rook, looked once at Lily with an expression that softened almost imperceptibly, then looked at Whitfield with the cold professional assessment of a man cataloguing what he saw for a report he was already composing in his mind. "This him?" Pruitt asked. "This is him?" Rook confirmed. Pruitt knelt in front of Lily. Not all the way down, his knees did not bend that way anymore, but low enough to meet her eyes. "Sweetheart," he said, "I am going to ask you some things. Is that all right?" Lily nodded. Her left hand was still at her chest. "The man who was holding your wrist, you said he told you your mother sent him." "She did not send anyone," Lily said. Her voice was steadier now than it had been at any point in the last 11 minutes. "My mom picks me up from the community center at 6:30 every Thursday after her courthouse shift. She's never late. She always brings me a peach from the vending machine on the second floor. She did not send this man. She does not know this man." Pruitt's jaw tightened. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "You told Mr. Callahan you heard something 3 weeks ago." Lily closed her eyes. When she spoke, it was in the precise, measured cadence of someone reciting something they had repeated to themselves so many times it had become architecture. "He said the audit request came through records. I know who processed it." Then he listened. "Then he said the paperwork goes back through the same office. Then he said the woman has a daughter. Thursdays. That is why Cade Mercer did not go anywhere." She opened her eyes. Pruitt looked up at Rook. Something passed between them in the silence. The understanding that what this 8-year-old girl had just recited from memory verbatim was not the frightened fragment of a child's imagination. It was the exact operational language of a man discussing how to neutralize an institutional threat by targeting the family of the person processing the paperwork that could destroy him. Pruitt stood. He turned to face Greer Whitfield with the full weight of 22 years of knowing what guilty looked like. "I know who you are," Pruitt said quietly. "I know what New Horizon Youth Services is, and I have known for 14 months that something in your case files does not sit right." He took one step forward. "Now I know why." Detective Carol Staves, Harlan County Sheriff's Office, walked into the courthouse square at 6:12 with 2 uniformed deputies at her back. She was 52 years old, gray hair pulled back from a face that had seen too much, and still showed up every morning. She and Rook Callahan had a working relationship of 14 years that neither of them had ever described to anyone in terms that would fit neatly into a form. She had been a junior detective on the Eli Callahan case in 2007. She had closed it at her supervisor's instruction. She had never fully made peace with that, and the weight of it had shaped her into a particular kind of detective, the kind who paid attention to children who followed the threads that other people dropped. She had been waiting for a call like this one for a long time. She looked at Rook. He nodded once. She looked at Lily, and her face did something that trained professional faces rarely did. It went genuinely entirely soft. Then she looked at Whitfield, and it went flat and hard and certain. Greer Whitfield, she said, you are being detained for questioning in connection with allegations of child endangerment, attempted kidnapping, and financial fraud related to DCFS billing records. She read him his rights on the courthouse steps. 113 Hells Angels watched in complete silence. Lily Holt stood in a yellow dress with her hand pressed flat against her chest and let herself cry for the first time in 11 weeks. Not because she had been saved, though she had been. Not because the man with the thin-framed glasses was finally being held still long enough for the truth to catch up to him, though he was. She cried because someone had heard her. After 11 weeks of watching and remembering and practicing in the bathroom mirror and carrying the weight of knowing something terrible was coming and finding no one who would listen, one man had come down 3 courthouse steps and said 4 words that contained everything she had been waiting for. I see your signal. She had been 8 years old on the day she started practicing. She was still 8 years old on the day it worked. And in the space between those 2 days, she had learned something she would carry for the rest of her life. Something no credential could teach and no institutional process could replicate. That preparation was not the same as certainty. That courage was not the same as fearlessness. That the difference between a child who made it home and a child who did not was sometimes nothing more than one person who had been broken by something terrible and had chosen instead of drowning in it to learn how to see. Rook Callahan stood beside her and said nothing. He did not need to. The flagpole rope snapped in the September wind. The last of the Harleys cut its engine in the overflow lot across the street. The deputies walked Whitfield toward the patrol car with his hands behind his back and his glasses sitting crooked on his face. Lily looked up at the man beside her, at the name on his wrist. She did not ask about it yet, but she would. Rex Pruitt had a particular way of entering a room that had nothing to do with size or noise. He was not a large man. 5'10" on a good day gray at the temples, moving with the careful economy of someone whose knees had been protesting since his early 50s. But he had spent 22 years as a Harlan County Sheriff's detective reading rooms, the way other men read newspapers quickly, completely understanding not just what was in them, but what was missing, what had been moved, what the arrangement of things was trying to tell him if he was patient enough to listen. He entered the Harlan County Community Center interview room at 7:43 that Thursday evening and sat down across from Lily Holt without a notepad, without a recorder, without any of the official apparatus that made children's mouths go tight and their eyes go careful. He sat down the way you sat down across from someone you were planning to listen to. Like the listening was the whole point, and everything else could wait. Lily was still in the yellow dress. Her right wrist had a compression wrap from the urgent care clinic where Doc Harlan had taken her and Nora in the hour after the courthouse. 4 whitened crescents from Whitfield's grip soft tissue, bruising nothing broken. Doc Harlan had been gentle in the way that only men who had seen a great deal of damage learn to be gentle, precise, and unhurried. His large hands impossibly careful around her small wrist. And when he finished, he had not said anything reassuring and hollow. He had just looked at Lily and nodded once, the nod of one person acknowledging another person's endurance, and somehow that had meant more than the reassurance would have. Now Lily sat with her hands in her lap and looked at Pruitt with the watchful, measuring attention she gave to everything. Nora Holt sat beside her daughter, with her hand resting on Lily's knee, close enough to feel light enough not to confine. Nora had arrived at the courthouse square at 6:21, 4 red lights, Run Courthouse badge still clipped to her jacket. She had seen the motorcycles first, then the patrol car, then Detective Stave speaking into her radio, and then through all of it her daughter, standing in a yellow dress with her hand on her chest, and tears running down her face, and something in her eyes that Nora recognized immediately, and would never forgive herself for not having recognized 11 weeks earlier. The particular look of someone who had been right about something terrible, and had paid the full price for no one believing them. Nora had dropped to her knees on the courthouse steps and held Lily so tightly the girl's ribs ached. She had said the only true thing available to her. "I should have listened. I should have listened to you. I'm sorry, baby." Lily had said, "You're listening now." And somehow in the specific mercy of children, that had been enough for the moment. Not enough to erase anything. Not enough to settle the debt. But enough for that moment which was all either of them had. Now Pruitt looked across the table at Lily and said, "I want to hear everything you remember. Not just about today. Everything. Starting from the first day you saw him." So Lily told him. She started with the Thursday in late June, when Whitfield had first appeared at the community center, and she had felt the frequency shift the note played wrong in a chord that should have been clean. She described what she had observed over the following weeks with a precision that made Pruitt's pen go still above his notepad. The positioning near the door, the pattern of questions, the information gathering disguised as friendliness. She described the phone call in the parking lot on the third Thursday of August and recited the words a third time in the same order without variation. The audit request came through records. I know who processed it. The paperwork goes back through the same office. The woman has a daughter. Thursdays. That is why Cade Mercer did not go anywhere. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment after she finished. "You heard that once," he said. "Yes," Lily said, "and you remembered it exactly." "I wrote it down in my math notebook," Lily said, "in the back. And then I kept saying it to myself so it would stay." She paused. "I knew it was important. I knew someone was going to need it eventually." Pruitt set his pen down. He looked at this 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress who had spent 3 weeks carrying the operational language of a predator's phone call in her memory, like a loaded weapon waiting for someone to hand it to. "You are going to be a very important witness," he said quietly. "What you just told me is not something a defense attorney is going to be able to dismiss. Not with the corroboration we already have. Not with your consistency." Lily nodded, accepting this the way she accepted most things as information to be filed and used. Then she said, "Who is Cade Mercer?" Pruitt looked at Nora. Nora nodded slightly. Pruitt looked back at Lily. "He is someone who tried to tell the truth a few years ago." Pruitt said carefully, "And the people who were supposed to listen did not. But because you remembered his name, because you said it out loud, we now have a chance to find him. To get him the hearing he deserved 3 years ago." Lily was quiet for a moment. "I hope he is okay," she said. Pruitt said, "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The Hells Angels clubhouse on County Road sat 7 miles outside Harlan, a low brick building with a gravel lot and a sign that asked politely but firmly for privacy. By 8:30 that evening, the lot held 113 motorcycles, 3 pickup trucks, and Pruitt's 2004 Crown Victoria that had survived 200,000 miles through some combination of mechanical stubbornness and refusal to accept retirement. Inside, the main room smelled like motor oil and coffee that had been on the burner too long, and the particular dense quiet of men who had gathered around something serious. The table at the center of the room had absorbed 2 decades of chapter business in its scarred wood surface. Rook stood at its head. Around him sat the men who had dropped everything and shown up because the words foster care coordinator and child had been enough. Pruitt had his files. Doc Harlan had his trauma kit, and the yellow skittle lily had pressed into his palm at the urgent care clinic. "Keep it," she had said, "so you remember." His hand had closed around it with a steadiness that had cost him something. Steady Bourne sat 2 chairs from the end, 49 years old, a man who had spent a decade as a middle school counselor. before he watched a student's abuse report get routed to a school board's legal team instead of DCFS in 2018, and had resigned the following week because he could not make himself stay in a building where that was how things worked. Tombstone Falk sat at the far end of the table, 71 years old, founding member. He had not spoken about his son in 27 years, the boy placed in state foster care in 1994 at age 4, and never located after the placement ended. When Rook had called and said what Whitfield was, Tombstone had not said a word on the phone. He had just shown up, which was the only answer that had ever mattered. Circuit Baird was 29 years old, the youngest full-patch member by 11 years. Former IT contractor with the particular quality of intelligence that expressed itself not in volume, but in the ability to find the thread in a data set that everyone else had walked past. He had his laptop open before Rook finished laying the file folder on the table. Rook said, Greer Whitfield, 47 years old, licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizon Youth Services, 9 years with DCFS, Boy Scout leader, hospital volunteer, clean background check, institutional trust built over nearly a decade. He paused, and a man who knew exactly which 8-year-old to target because her mother processed the paperwork that could destroy him. The room was quiet. Give me his full legal name and date of birth, Circuit said. Pruitt slid a sheet across the table. Greer Edmund Whitfield, February 11th, 1977. New Horizon Youth Services is registered as a 501c3. IRS filings show annual revenue of $312,000. Circuit's fingers moved. The room waited. 30 seconds. Then Circuit's expression changed in the specific way it changed when he found something that confirmed the worst version of what he had been looking for. Got something, he said. New Horizons operating account shows monthly transfers of $4,200 to a personal account in Whitfield's name, dating back to January 2017. He pulled up another window. That is $50,400 per year, times 7 years. He tapped the keys. $352,800 in personal transfers from a non-profit operating account. That is embezzlement, Steady said. That is what I found in 45 seconds, Circuit said. Give me the Cade Mercer billing records. Another minute. 2. Found him. Circuit's voice had gone flat. Cade Mercer, born March 3, 2005. Placed with New Horizon Youth Services under Whitfield's coordination from September 2019 through March 2021. Age during placement, 14 to 16. He scrolled. According to DCFS billing records, Whitfield collected placement stipends for Cade from September 2019 through August 2023. The room went very still. Cade filed his complaint and left the system in March 2021, Pruitt said slowly. Confirmed, Circuit said. Whitfield kept billing for him for 2 years and 5 months after that, at $1,850 per month. He paused. That is $53,250 in fraudulent billings for one child who was no longer in the system. Tombstone Falk stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room. Rook understood. Some mathematics were too heavy to remain seated for. Keep going, Rook said quietly. Circuit pulled up another screen. 2 more names in the billing records with the same pattern. Children with case file numbers that do not correspond to active placements. One shows as aged out in 2020, but billing continued through 2023. The other. He stopped. The other, Rook said, has a social security number that comes back as never issued. Pruitt's jaw tightened. Ghost placement, he said. A child who never existed. Correct. Circuit's voice had gone cold in the way voices went cold when the numbers stopped being abstract. Whitfield has been collecting stipends for a non-existent child since May 2018, 5 years and 4 months at $1,850 per month. Another $118,400. He looked up from the screen. Total fraudulent billings across 3 cases. $167,450. Add the personal transfers from the operating account. $352,800. He held the room's attention for one more second. Total documented theft from a system designed to protect the most vulnerable children in Georgia. $520,250. The silence in that room was the kind that preceded one of two things: violence or justice. It was the same silence containing the same energy, and the difference between them was a choice that the men in the room made, each of them privately and without discussion in the moment it lasted. Rook said, "Where did the money go?" Circuit pulled up another window. Bank records show several large purchases. A 2021 Airstream trailer, 27 feet, purchased for $83,700, registered to Whitfield's brother's address in Statesboro. He scrolled. 3.4 acres of undeveloped land on the Altamaha River, purchased under a shell LLC called Riverbend Holdings. Purchase price $71,400. The LLC's registered agent is. He stopped. Greer Edmund Whitfield circuit finished. What else? Rook said. 6 years of annual dues and green fees at Vidalia Country Club. Circuit looked up. Total $43,800. He stole from children who had nothing, Steady said. And he spent it on a trailer, land and golf. Tombstone turned from the window. His face carried 27 years of a particular weight, and that weight had just been given a shape it had not had before. How much does the girl's family have? He said. Pruitt checked his notes. Nora Holt's checking account holds $1,740. No savings, no family nearby. Whitfield's documented net worth, Circuit said. Approximately $2.1 million, including the fraudulent assets. Tombstone nodded once. His voice was quiet and final. Then we take it all back. At 8:47, Rook's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was a woman's older, carrying the particular tremor of someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally decided that the weight was worse than whatever happened when she put it down. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "my name is Willa Booth. I used to work for DCFS as an intake supervisor. I heard about what happened today on the courthouse steps. I need to talk to someone." Rook's eyes found Pruitt's across the table. "I am listening," Rook said. "Not on the phone." The woman's voice dropped. "There is a diner on Highway 280, Patton's, near the county line. I will be there in 20 minutes. I will be there in 15, Rook said. The line went dead. Patton's diner sat at the edge of a 2-lane road where the streetlights ran out and the fields began. It was the kind of place that had been there long enough to become invisible to people who drove past it every day with cracked vinyl boots and coffee that had been warming on the same burner since sometime in the previous decade, and the particular quality of anonymity that came from being nowhere anyone important would choose to be. Willa Booth was 71 years old. She sat in the booth at the back with a cold cup of coffee and an envelope she kept touching. The way people touch things they were afraid of losing. Small woman, white hair, cut practical, and short eyes behind thick-framed glasses that had the slightly unfocused quality of someone who had spent 3 years looking at something internal rather than at the world in front of her. Rook slid into the booth across from her. Pruitt stood near the door. "Thank you for coming," Willa said. Her hands were not steady. "I have been carrying this since 2021. I did not know how to begin it. I did not know who to bring it to. And then I heard what happened today, what you did on those courthouse steps, and I thought..." She stopped. "I thought that was the kind of person who would actually do something with what I have." "Start from the beginning," Rook said. Willa nodded. She slid the envelope across the table with both hands like something being formally surrendered. "March 17th, 2021, she said. A 16-year-old named Kate Mercer came into the DCFS office and filed a formal complaint against Greer Whitfield. I was the intake supervisor who received it. She paused. The complaint was 14 pages handwritten in block letters. It was specific. It included dates, names of incidents, descriptions, 2 potential witnesses from the placement. She paused again. It was credible. I knew it was credible the moment I finished reading it. I had been doing intake for 11 years by that point, and I knew the difference between a child working through confused feelings and a child describing something that had actually happened to them. What happened to the complaint, Rook said. I brought it to my supervisor, a man named Hamon Vec. Regional supervisor, 15 years in the department, the kind of institutional weight that made people stop asking questions. She looked down at the envelope. He told me to set it aside, said it required additional documentation before we could proceed. I asked what documentation specifically. He said he would let me know. He never did. Rook said nothing. 2 weeks later, Willa continued. Whitfield came to the office. Had a closed-door meeting with Vec that lasted just over an hour. When Whitfield left, Vec called me in and told me Cade's complaint had been resolved internally. He said Cade had a history of emotional instability and fabrication, and the complaint was not credible. She looked up. Her eyes were steady now behind the thick glasses, the steadiness of someone who had finally arrived at the thing they had been building toward. I knew it was credible. I had read it. I had seen Cade's face when he filed it. That boy was telling the truth. She said it without drama, as simple fact. Why did you not push back? Rook asked. Not accusatory, just asking. Because I was 58 years old and 6 months from qualifying for my full pension, Willa said. Because Harmon Vec had the administrative standing to make that pension complicated if he chose to. Because I told myself someone else would catch it, that the system had other checkpoints, that one buried complaint would not be the final word. She looked at her hands. I was wrong. I have known I was wrong every single day since. She pushed the envelope closer. That is my personal copy of Kate's complaint. I made it the morning after Vec told me to bury the original. I do not know exactly why I made it. Some part of me knew this day would come, that someone would finally pull the right thread. Rook opened the envelope. Inside, 14 pages of handwritten block letters signed and dated March 17th, 2021 by Cade Mercer. He read the first page, his jaw locked. There is more, Willa said. 3 days after Vec told me the complaint was closed, I noticed an unusual transaction in the audit log. Not my department officially, but I had access and I was looking for anything that would help me understand what had happened. She opened her own folder. Harmon Vec made a $4,200 cash withdrawal from his personal account on March 20th, 2021. Rook went still. That is the only cash withdrawal of that size in his account's documented history. She slid the printout across the table. I kept this too. I kept everything I could reach. Because I was not brave enough to use it then, and I was too much of a coward to throw it away. Rook looked at the printout, looked at the date, looked at the amount. Payment, he said. That is what I believe Villa said. I cannot prove the connection directly. But the timing is. She stopped. The timing is what it is. Rook looked at Pruitt across the diner. Pruitt was already writing. This goes to Detective Staves tonight, Rook said. I know, you will be questioned. Possibly charged with failure to report. I know. Her hands had stopped shaking. She looked at Rook with the clear, exhausted eyes of a woman who had spent 3 years paying a price in private and had finally decided to pay it in public, instead where it might actually mean something. I am 71 years old. I have my pension. What I do not have is the ability to look at myself clearly anymore. Maybe this changes that. Rook stood. He looked at her for a moment. You should have helped him when it mattered, he said, quietly, without cruelty. I know that, she said, but you are helping him now. He picked up the envelope. That counts for something. He walked out. Pruitt followed. In the parking lot under the broken light, Rook handed the envelope to Pruitt. Get this to Staves tonight, he said. Tell her Willa Booth is willing to testify. Tell her there is a cash withdrawal receipt that connects Vec directly to the burial of Cade's complaint. Pruitt took it. His expression was the expression of a man who had spent 22 years watching cases close too early and was now holding in his hands the reason one of them should not have. With this and the financial records, he said slowly, we have a pattern. We have institutional corruption. We have enough to finish him, Rook said. His phone buzzed. Text from Circuit. 4 words. Found the river property. Come now. The 3.4 acres on the Altamaha River sat at the end of a dirt road that turned to mud in the rain and smelled like river water and the deep green rot of things decomposing back into earth. Rook Pruitt. Doc Harlan and Steady Bourne arrived at 9:52 in 2 trucks, with high beams cutting through a darkness that felt intentional. Chosen the kind of darkness a man picked when he needed no one to see what he was doing. The land was undeveloped, no structure, no utilities, just scrub and low trees and a clearing near the water, where someone had built a fire ring and left it looking casual the way you left something looking casual when its casualness was the entire point. They searched with flashlights and the patience of men who had learned that what you were looking for was almost never where it appeared to be. Doc Harlan found it first, a waterproof storage container, military grade, buried 18 inches under the fire ring, sealed with a combination lock that had not anticipated a tire iron applied by a man who had been carrying quiet fury for a very long time. Pruitt broke the lock. Inside 3 file folders, each one labeled with the child's name in Whitfield's handwriting. Those particular small neat letters that looked on the surface like the handwriting of a careful and organized professional and contained something else entirely. The first folder held photographs of injuries never reported, medical notes that should have been in DCFS files and were not held here, instead held somewhere no investigator would find them without knowing exactly where to look. The second folder held handwritten notes in Whitfield's own hand dates and descriptions of incidents he had never put into any official record kept here in the ground, beside a river on land he owned under a shell company. Kept for reasons Rook understood immediately, and that made the night feel colder. Insurance. The private kind. The kind a man kept when the people he had leverage over needed to be reminded of the leverage. The third folder. Pruitt opened it. His hands were steady with the particular steadiness of a man suppressing something large enough to require real effort. Inside a single document, a life insurance policy, issued by a carrier out of Atlanta. Policy amount $127,600. Beneficiary Greer Edmund Wheatfield. Insured Cade Mercer. Date of policy February 4th, 2021. Date of Cade Mercer's formal complaint to DCFS March 17th, 2021. 41 days. Whitfield had taken out a life insurance policy on a child in his care. 41 days before that child filed a complaint that could have destroyed him. Steady said it first. His voice was hollow in the way voices went hollow when language was trying to contain something that did not fit inside it. He was going to kill him. Pruitt did not answer immediately. He was looking at the document with the expression of a detective who had seen enough to know that what he was holding had been waiting in the ground beside this river for 3 years for someone to come dig it up. Cade filed the complaint, Rook said quietly. The complaint got buried, and Whitfield had already taken out the policy. Cade ran, Doc Harlan said. He figured it out and he ran before Whitfield could. Or Cade ran because the complaint went nowhere, and he understood what that meant, Pruitt said. He was 16 years old, no attorney, no advocate, He filed the truth and watched it disappear, and he was smart enough or frightened enough to understand what came next. Rook pulled out his phone. "We find Kate Mercer tonight," he said. At 11:17 that evening, Circuit sent a location. Billings, Montana, a phone number, a message that said he answered. He is 19. He is alive. He will talk. Rook stepped outside the clubhouse into the September night and called the number. It rang 4 times. Then a young man's voice, careful and guarded in the way voices were careful and guarded when the world had given them specific reasons to be. "Hello," Kate Rook said. "My name is Rook Callahan. I am in Harlan County, Georgia. Tonight, an 8-year-old girl remembered your name and said it out loud on the courthouse steps. And because she did, Greer Whitfield is in custody. And the file he thought he buried is sitting on a table in front of me." A long silence. "Then is she okay?" "She's okay," Rook said. Another silence. Longer. "I filed a complaint," Cade said, "in 2021. I was 16. "I know," Rook said. "We have the original. All 14 pages. A sound on the other end of the line that might have been a breath or might have been something else entirely." "Nobody believed me," Cade said. "Somebody believes you now," Rook said. "And we need you to come home and say it in a courtroom. Not because you owe anything to anyone, but because there is a girl in a yellow dress who remembered your name when she was scared enough to forget everything else, and she deserves to know that it mattered." The night was quiet around Rook. The river was somewhere in the dark, carrying whatever it carried. Cade Mercer said, "Okay." Special Agent Petra Sloan, FBI Atlanta Field Office Financial Crimes Division, arrived at the clubhouse at 11:43 in a dark sedan with federal plates, and the expression of a woman who had been working this case longer than she wanted to acknowledge, and had the particular exhaustion of someone who knew they were about to have a conversation they were not going to enjoy. She walked in without knocking, looked at the room, looked at the table covered in Circuit's printouts and Pruett's files, and the contents of a waterproof container that had been buried beside a river. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "I am told you have material relevant to an open federal investigation. Depends on what you are investigating," Rook said. "New Horizon Youth Services, Whitfield. DCFS billing fraud." Her eyes moved across the table. "Based on what I am looking at, I am going to guess you have already done a significant portion of my work for me. How long has your office known about Whitfield?" Rook asked. Sloane's expression tightened. 4 months. We have been building the case carefully." 4 months, Rook said. The silence that followed confirmed everything the silence needed to confirm. "And while you were building it, an 8-year-old girl was being targeted because her mother processed the paperwork that triggered your investigation." Sloane had no adequate response to that. She was professional enough not to attempt one. "We resolved the immediate threat in 3 hours, Rook said. "What do you have that we need?" Sloane looked at Circuit's financial map on the laptop screen. Her expression shifted in the small, controlled way of someone who had just seen a gap in their case filled in. "Personal transfer records," she said quietly. "We had the DCFS billing irregularities. We did not have the direct transfers to his personal account or the full asset trail." Pruitt slid the waterproof container across the table. Sloane looked at the insurance policy. She picked it up carefully, read the date, set it back down. "If this is authenticated," she said, "the charges expand significantly beyond financial fraud." "We have one condition for full cooperation," Rook said. Sloane waited. "Lily Holt has a victim advocate assigned before the first interview. No one speaks to her without her mother present. And Harmon Vec, the supervisor who buried Kate's complaint, is arrested this week, not after another month of process." Sloane looked at Rook for a long moment. "We will be in touch," she said. She started to leave. Rook said her name. She turned. "You do right by these children," he said. A pause. Something moved through her professional expression. "That is the job, Mr. Callahan," she said. She walked out into the September night, taking with her $520,000 of documented evidence and the handwritten testimony of a 16-year-old boy who had told the truth 3 years ago and had not yet been given the chance to have it matter. But that was coming. Rook stood at the window of the clubhouse and looked out at the parking lot full of motorcycles and the dark road beyond it. In his vest pocket, his phone. In the folder on that phone, 17 years of entries, messages, photographs, case files. The specific archaeology of a grief that had learned to move through the world without stopping. He did not add anything new tonight. Not yet. There was still work to do. There was Cade Mercer flying in from Montana. There was Willa Booth, preparing to testify to the things she had spent 3 years trying not to see in the mirror. There was Harmon Veck, who did not yet know that a cash withdrawal receipt from 2021 was sitting in an evidence bag with his name on it. There was a trial to come and 17 counts and a courtroom where an 8-year-old girl's word-perfect memory of a parking lot phone call would stand against 9 years of institutional trust and all the credentials that institutional trust could buy. There was all of that still ahead. But tonight, Rook allowed himself one moment at the window, one moment to acknowledge what the day had been. Not victory, not yet, but the turn. The point at which the weight of what had been hidden finally exceeded the strength of the structures built to hide it. In a yellow dress in an apartment on the east side of Harlan, with a check engine light in the parking lot and $1,740 in the bank. A girl was sleeping who should not have made it home tonight. She had made it home because she had practiced in the bathroom mirror, because she had memorized a phone call, because she had trusted a stranger with a name on his wrist and the particular stillness of a man who had learned what it cost to look away. Rook Callahan turned from the window. There was still work to do. The morning after was a Friday. Lily woke in her own bed in her own room in the apartment at 2714 Sycamore Mill Road and lay still for a long moment before she opened her eyes. She had learned to do this over the past 11 weeks, to check the silence first, to take inventory of the sounds in the apartment before she committed to consciousness. The refrigerator hum, the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere on the far side of the complex. Her mother's coffee maker clicking through its cycle in the kitchen. Normal sounds, the sounds of a morning that was not Thursday, the sounds of a world that had not yet required anything of her. She opened her eyes. The yellow dress was hanging on the back of her door. Nora had washed it twice the night before, once when they got home, and once more before she went to bed, as if 2 cycles through the machine could accomplish what one could not. The white buttons were all intact. The fabric had kept its color. It was still yellow. Still the dress she had ironed herself on the bathroom counter the morning before. She looked at it for a moment. Then she got up. Nora was standing at the kitchen counter with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, not drinking it, just holding it, the specific posture of a person using warmth as something to hold on to. She had not slept. Lily could tell from the quality of the quiet around her, the slightly too careful stillness of someone who had spent the night sitting with something large and had not yet found a place to put it down. When she heard Lily's footsteps, she turned and something in her face shifted. The relief of it was physical, like a knot releasing. "Hey, baby," she said. "Hey," Lily said. They did not need more than that yet. Lily climbed onto the kitchen stool, and Nora put a glass of orange juice in front of her. And they sat together in the morning light with the coffee maker ticking, and the lawnmower humming outside, and the particular peace of 2 people who had been frightened for each other and were now simply glad to be in the same room. After a while, Nora said, "Doc Harlan called this morning. He wants to take us to the clinic. Get your wrist properly looked at. He said he will come by at 9. Lily looked at the compression wrap on her right wrist. The bruising had darkened overnight 4 distinct marks in a pattern she understood without anyone having to explain it to her. "Okay," she said. Then she said, "Mom." "Yeah, baby. I am not angry at you. I want you to know that." Nora set her mug down very carefully. Her eyes filled. You should be, she said. I should have listened. The first time you told me. I should have. You were tired, Lily said. You are always tired. That is not the same as not caring. Nora's composure broke quietly the way composure broke in people who were genuinely strong, not with drama but with the small collapse of something that had been held together past its limit. She pressed one hand over her mouth. Her shoulder shook once. Lily got down from the stool and walked around the counter and stood beside her mother and put her left hand against Nora's back. She did not say anything. She had learned from years of watching her mother carry things alone that sometimes the most useful thing you could offer was just your presence, just the fact of being there, just letting someone know they did not have to hold everything by themselves right now. After a moment, Nora straightened, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looked at her daughter. When did you get so old? She said. I do not know, Lily said. It just happened. They ate breakfast. The morning moved forward in the way mornings did, with small practical things filling the spaces that feeling could not occupy. Lily ate toast. Nora made eggs. The check engine light was still on in the car in the parking lot below. The coffee was still warm. Doc Harlan arrived at 9:04 in a truck that had seen better decades but ran without complaint. He was 63 years old, broad across the shoulders, carrying the settled weight of a man who had spent decades making himself useful without making himself conspicuous. He wore his riding vest over a plain flannel shirt and carried a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks from the clubhouse that held 3 cinnamon rolls he had picked up on the way without mentioning it to anyone. He knocked twice. When Nora opened the door, he held out the bag. Thought you might not have felt like making breakfast, he said. It was not entirely accurate, but it was kind, and Nora took the bag and said thank you, in a voice that meant more than the words. At the clinic, Doc sat in the waiting room, while Dr. Petra Kowal examined Lily's wrist. He sat with his elbows on his knees and a yellow skittle in his vest pocket that he had not moved since Lily pressed it into his palm the night before. Keep it, she had said. So you remember. He had not needed the instruction. He had the kind of memory that held certain moments in high resolution, regardless of what else faded. And this one was already fixed. The examination took 40 minutes. When Dr. Kowal came out, she looked at Doc with the expression of a physician who had filed this kind of report before and found the filing a poor substitute for prevention. She said 4 words, nothing broken, good care. Then she went to the nurse's station to begin the documentation that would become in 6 months one small piece of a much larger evidentiary structure. Nora came out with Lily. The compression wrap had been replaced with a cleaner bandage. The 4 marks were photographed, documented, time-stamped, and entered into a system that would preserve them beyond any individual's ability to make them disappear. Doc knelt in front of Lily. His knees protested. He knelt anyway. He held out the paper bag. Inside the last cinnamon roll, which he had kept back specifically. Doc says sugar is medicinal, he said, under certain circumstances. Lily looked at him. Then she looked at his vest pocket, at the small yellow shape barely visible above the edge. You still have it, she said. Doc put his hand over his pocket. Yes, he said. I do. Good, Lily said. She took the cinnamon roll. When they walked out to the parking lot, the September morning had warmed into something almost gentle. Doc drove them home without filling the silence with words. He understood from years of sitting with people in difficult moments that silence was not something to be fixed. It was sometimes the most respectful thing you could offer. The deposit appeared in Nora Holt's checking account at 11:43 that morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and a stack of bills she had been staring at without processing when her phone buzzed with the bank notification. She looked at it, read it twice, put the phone face down on the table, picked it up again. $8,000 transferred from an account registered to Harlan Chapter HAS Emergency Support Fund. The memo line said simply, "No strings." Nora sat with that for a long time. She called the number listed in the transfer details. A man answered. Older voice. She did not recognize it. "I just received a deposit," she said. "I do not know how to—" "You do not need to," the voice said. "Your daughter did something very brave. That is all." The line went quiet for a moment. "I have a daughter too," the voice said. "Had one. She is the reason I picked up when the call came. You raise a brave child by being someone worth being brave for. Whatever you did right, keep doing it." The line ended. Nora put the phone down on the table and slid off the chair onto the kitchen floor and sat there with her back against the cabinet and cried in the specific way that people cried when they had been carrying the weight of not quite making it of. Almost but not enough of being one unexpected expense, away from a version of their life they could not afford. And someone had, without being asked and without requiring anything in return, simply removed a portion of that weight. She cried for 20 minutes. Lily came in from her room, sat down on the kitchen floor beside her mother, and put her head on Nora's shoulder. "We are okay now," Lily said. "Right?" Nora wrapped one arm around her daughter. "Yeah, baby, we are okay now." Amos Trent knocked on the door of apartment 4B at 217 that afternoon. He was 68 years old, the landlord of the Sycamore Mill complex since 1989. A man who had owned these 12 units for 35 years and had evicted exactly 3 tenants in all that time, each for reasons involving damage or direct threat to other residents, never for anything as abstract as being temporarily short. He was a tall man, lean in the way of men, who had worked with their hands their whole lives with a face that showed all of its years without apology. When Nora opened the door, he took his hat off. "Miss Holt," he said, "I heard about what happened to your girl. I'm real sorry it got as close as it did." Nora nodded. She did not trust her voice all the way. "I have been thinking," Amos said. "This building needs someone to manage maintenance requests, coordinate with contractors, keep the paperwork straight. 20 hours a week, $840 a month." He paused. "The position comes with a 50% reduction on your rent. Your unit would run $340 a month." Nora stared at him. "Mr. Trent," she said carefully, "I do not have property management experience." "You work in courthouse records," he said. "You track paperwork and manage requests from people who do not always make your job easy. That is 90% of what this position is." He held her gaze. "And I have owned this building for 35 years. I know who pays on time and who keeps their unit clean and who my other tenants never complain about. You have been here 4 years. You are all 3. Nora's throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Amos was quiet for a moment. He looked past her into the apartment at the yellow dress still hanging on the bedroom door, at the small shoes by the entrance, with the sunflower traced in fresh red marker on the left toe. "My own daughter was in foster care once," he said. "Long time ago when I was young and making bad choices and could not hold things together. Someone helped her when I was not able to." He put his hat back on. "Figure it is my turn to pass that on." He held out his hand. "You start Monday if you want it." Nora shook his hand. Then she closed the door and stood in the hallway of her apartment for a long moment before she went to find Lily. They were okay. They were going to be okay. Harmon Vec was arrested at 6:48 on Friday morning. The process had moved faster than anyone anticipated because Pruitt, 22 years of knowing exactly which document went to which desk, had delivered Willa Booth's evidence package and the cash withdrawal receipt to the U.S. Attorney's Office by 10:30 the night before, with a cover letter that contained the relevant case numbers and the names of the 2 federal agents already working the Whitfield investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office had people who worked through the night when the evidence was what this evidence was. Vec was eating breakfast when the agents arrived. He answered the door. In his robe saw 2 federal badges and made the specific calculation of a man who understood immediately that the window for advantageous cooperation was narrow and closing. He said, "I want to talk to someone before I say anything." They said, "That is your right." He said, "I also want to know what you have." They showed him the receipt, $4,200 cash. March 20th, 2021. His account. 3 days after Cade Mercer's complaint was filed. 3 days after the complaint was assigned to his desk. Vec sat down in his kitchen chair very slowly. He was 61 years old. He had spent 23 years inside a system that he had told himself for most of those years he was serving faithfully. He had also spent several of those years doing small favors for men who could make institutional life easier, and then larger favors. And then the favor that had cost a 16-year-old boy 3 years of his life and nearly cost him the rest. By 9:15 that morning, Vec's attorney had arranged a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. By 10:40, Vec had provided two additional names, employees within the DCFS regional network who had received payments from Whitfield's nonprofit account in exchange for administrative assistance. Two more threads in the fabric, two more reasons the audit Nora Holt had processed was going to matter far beyond what anyone had initially understood. But Harmon Vec, it turned out, was not finished calculating. 3 days after his cooperation agreement was signed, his attorney filed a motion challenging the admissibility of Willa Booth's testimony on the grounds that her evidence had been improperly preserved outside official channels. Simultaneously, a separate attorney appeared, one that nobody on Pruitt's side of the table had seen before, representing a civil interest in Cade Mercer's credibility as a witness. The motion alleged that Cade's complaint had originated from documented emotional instability and that his account of events was contradicted by official case notes. The official case notes that Harmon Vec's office had written. Detective Staves called Rook at 7 in the evening. "They are trying to bury Cade again," she said. "Different tools, same result." Rook was quiet for a moment. Then he called Pruitt. Pruitt spent 45 minutes on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office and emerged from the conversation with something that changed the shape of everything. The official case notes challenging Cade's account were authored by Harmon Vec himself, dated 2 weeks after Cade's complaint was filed, and time-stamped the same day Vec met with Whitfield behind closed doors. They had not existed before that meeting. Circuit found the original file creation metadata in 20 minutes. The notes Vec was using to discredit Cade Mercer had been written after Whitfield paid him to make the complaint disappear. They were not documentation of Cade's instability. They were the price of burying the truth. Pruitt put the metadata analysis on the U.S. Attorney's desk at 9:45 that evening alongside the original timeline and the cash withdrawal receipt. The motion to exclude Willa Booth's testimony was denied by 10:15. The civil challenge to Cade's credibility was withdrawn by Vec's second attorney before midnight. The dominoes had started falling. They did not stop. Rook found out about the full resolution of Vec's legal maneuvering from Pruitt, who called the next morning with the particular satisfaction of a former detective watching a case close the way cases were supposed to close. "Both motions dead," Pruitt said. "Metadata killed the notes. Vec's cooperation agreement stands, but his room to maneuver is gone. He knows it." Rook was sitting on his porch with coffee that was still warm for once. The morning was cool September, giving way to something with an edge to it. "Good," he said. "There is something else," Pruitt said. His voice changed. Something in it went careful the way it went careful when he was about to say something he had been deciding how to say for a while. "The DCFS document release," he said. "The material Sloan's team pulled from New Horizons records as part of the federal seizure. They went through a backlog last night, old case files from the period when Whitfield first started. They found something." Rook waited. "There is a file," Pruitt said, "from 2007, a complaint filed by a child in Whitfield's program that year. The complaint was handled by a supervisor named Gerald Mast, who retired in 2009 with a full pension. The complaint was buried using the same method. Same language in the administrative notes. Set aside pending documentation. Documentation never specified. Rook's hand tightened on his coffee mug. The child who filed the complaint, Pruitt said carefully, was 6 years old at the time. The morning went very quiet. The child's name, Pruitt said, was Eli Callahan. Rook set the coffee mug down on the porch railing. He did not trust his hands with it anymore. He had spent 17 years with a version of events that the paperwork described as a placement disruption. A placement disruption was the language the system used when what had actually happened was too specific and too damaging to survive in official records. He had spent 17 years knowing that something had been done to his son during the months he was deployed, and knowing that the system that was supposed to protect Eli had instead protected the people who hurt him, and not knowing the full shape of it. Because the full shape of it had been buried by a man named Gerald Mast, who had retired on a full pension and been unreachable ever since. Now the full shape of it was sitting in a federal evidence file in Atlanta. Eli had known. Eli had told someone. Eli had been 6 years old and had walked into a DCFS office and said the truest thing he knew and had been filed away under pending documentation. Eli had been brave. His son had been brave. Rook sat on his porch for a long time. The coffee went cold. The morning moved forward around him. A car pulled out of the driveway across the street. A dog barked once and stopped. The world continued its ordinary business with the indifference the world had always shown to the weight of particular moments. Inside the truck, when he finally got up and walked to it and sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, Rook Callahan put his hands on the steering wheel and bent forward and pressed his forehead against them. And for the first time in 17 years, he cried. Not the brief, controlled release of a man allowing himself a moment and reclaiming composure. Something older and deeper and longer than that. The specific grief of a father who had spent 17 years not knowing if his son had been silent, if his son had accepted what was done to him, if his son had believed no one would come, and who now knew that his son had done what Lily Holt had done, had told the truth, had trusted someone to hear it, had been let down by the people who should have caught it let down again and again until the letting down became the only story the records showed. Eli had made a signal. Nobody had seen it. Rook stayed in the truck until the crying finished. It finished the way it finished in its own time without consulting anyone. Then he sat up and looked at the name on his wrist, the script letters in the morning light. Eli, March 14th, 2007. He had put the date there because it was the date Eli was gone in a way that could not be undone. He had carried it as a wound for 17 years. He understood now, sitting in the truck with the morning quiet around him, that he could carry it differently. Not as the date everything ended. As the date Eli had been brave and no one had been looking. Rook was looking now. He had been looking for 17 years. And because he had been looking, a girl in a yellow dress had made it home on a Thursday afternoon in September. That was not enough. It would never be enough, but it was not nothing. He started the truck and drove. The 6 months between Whitfield's arrest and his trial moved with the particular momentum of a federal case that had more evidence than it needed, and defendants who were running out of options. Vex Cooperation produced 3 additional counts against Whitfield beyond the original 17. The ghost placement records were authenticated. The river property was seized. The Airstream trailer in Statesboro was seized. The country club membership was terminated in the specific institutional way that organizations distance themselves from people who had become embarrassing. Willa Booth testified before a federal grand jury in November. She sat in the witness chair in a navy blue suit and testified for 2 hours and 40 minutes with the composed, exhausted clarity of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment in her conscience for 3 years. Her pension was not touched. The U.S. Attorney's Office had determined that her cooperation and the evidence she had preserved made prosecution counterproductive. She drove home from the courthouse in Atlanta, and did not call anyone and did not celebrate anything. She went inside and made tea and sat at her kitchen table and felt for the first time in 3 years that the weight on the inside of her chest was something other than what it had always been. Cade Mercer flew in from Billings, Montana on a Wednesday in late February. He was 19 years old. 5'11", lean in the way of someone who had spent several years making himself harder to notice with eyes that held the specific quality of someone who had learned to assess rooms quickly and locate the exits. He had been living in Montana for 2 years, working construction in the summers and warehouse work in the winters, building a life in the deliberate way of someone who understood that stability was not given, but built one careful layer at a time. Rook met him at the airport. They shook hands. Cade looked at the vest, at the patches at the name on the wrist. "You are the one who called," Cade said. "I am," Rook said. Cade looked at him for a moment with the measuring attention of someone deciding whether a person was what they appeared to be. "The girl," he said. "She's really okay." "She's," Rook said. "She would like to meet you. After, if you are willing." Cade nodded. Then he picked up his bag and they walked out of the airport into the Georgia morning. He testified on the third day of the trial. He walked to the witness stand in a clean, dark shirt and sat down and looked at the courtroom with the stillness of someone who had prepared for this moment long enough that the preparation had become a kind of armor. The defense attorney was a competent man from Atlanta who had spent 6 weeks building the argument that Cade's complaint had been the product of emotional instability, that his account was inconsistent, that his memory of events 3 years past was unreliable. Cade answered every question in the same measured voice. He did not perform anything. He simply said what had happened in the order it had happened with the specific details that could only come from someone who had lived it. And he said it in a way that made the gap between what the defense attorney was suggesting and what had actually occurred visible to everyone in the room. Near the end of his testimony, the prosecuting attorney asked him one final question. "What made you decide to come back and testify after everything?" Cade was quiet for a moment. He looked at the gallery. Lily was there in the third row beside Nora. Yellow dress, hands folded in her lap, watching him with the steady, serious attention she gave to everything. When their eyes met, something passed between them that had no name in any language Cade had learned, but that he recognized immediately. The specific recognition of someone who had been in a version of the same room, who had counted seconds and looked for exits, and hoped against the accumulated evidence of their experience that someone was going to stop. Lily held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not offer him pity or performance. She just looked at him, the way she had looked at Rook on the courthouse steps, with the open measuring attention of someone who had decided to trust the weight another person carried. "I ran in 2021, Cade said. His voice was steady. "Because I filed the truth and watched it disappear, and I did not think anyone was ever going to believe me." He paused. "A few months ago, a man called me and told me that an 8-year-old girl had remembered my name when she was scared enough to forget everything else, and said it out loud to a stranger on a courthouse step." He looked at Lily directly now. "I came back because she did that, because she remembered me when I thought I had been forgotten, and because she deserved to know that it mattered." The courtroom was quiet in the specific way that courtrooms went quiet when truth arrived in a form that all the legal language in the room could not improve upon or diminish. Lily did not look away. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Greer Edmund Whitfield was found guilty on all 17 counts: federal child endangerment, attempted kidnapping, wire fraud, grand theft from a government program, conspiracy to defraud a government agency, obstruction of justice, insurance fraud. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison with no eligibility for parole. He said before he pronounced the sentence that the case represented one of the most sustained and deliberate betrayals of institutional trust he had encountered in 26 years on the bench. He said that the people who were supposed to catch this had failed repeatedly and consequentially. He said the only reason the failure had not cost more than it had was a combination of a 19-year-old's survival instincts and an 8-year-old's extraordinary preparation. Then he sentenced Greer Whitfield and closed the file. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, Cade Mercer crouched in front of Lily Holt. He was 19 and she was 9, and they looked at each other with the recognition of people who had experienced adjacent versions of the same thing without ever having been in the same room. "Thank you," Cade said, "for remembering my name." Lily looked at him seriously. "I wrote it down," she said, "in my math notebook, in the back in small writing. I knew it was important." Cade was quiet for a moment. "You were right," he said. "It was." He stood, shook Rook's hand, nodded to Pruitt. Then he walked out of the courthouse into the February afternoon back toward the life he was building, one careful layer at a time, carrying something he had not had when he walked in. The knowledge that the truth he had told at 16 had finally 3 years late landed somewhere. It could not be ignored. 6 months after the verdict, on a Wednesday morning in August, Lily Holt stood at a podium in the Harlan County Primary School auditorium and faced 300 students, their parents behind them, teachers along the walls. She was 9 years old. She wore a yellow dress that Nora had bought for the occasion, slightly different cut from the Thursday dress, same color. She had redrawn the sunflower on her left shoe that morning, in fresh red marker, slow and deliberate, the way she did everything that mattered. Principal Aldridge introduced her, said the words brave and important and safety, the words adults used when they wanted to acknowledge something without fully committing to its weight. Lily stood at the podium and waited for the applause to finish. She looked at the room. In the second row, a kindergartner with pigtails was already practicing the signal without being asked, her small thumb tucked under 4 small fingers, watching Lily with the open attention of someone who understood already that this was not going to be like the usual assembly. In the front row, Nora Holt sat with her hands in her lap and her courthouse badge still clipped to her jacket, and her eyes bright with something she was not entirely managing to contain. And at the back of the auditorium, just inside the door, partially hidden by the frame in the particular way of a man who had spent decades making himself useful in spaces without making himself conspicuous. Rook Callahan stood in a dark jacket instead of his vest out of respect for the school. His arms were crossed. His full attention was on the girl at the podium. He had not told anyone he was coming. He had been on his way to a supplier in Layton, and something had pulled him off the highway, the same pull that had turned him toward the courthouse steps 8 months ago, the gravity of a thing that mattered. Lily had not told anyone she knew he might come. But when she looked to the back of the room and found him there, she did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had accounted for this possibility and was glad to have the accounting confirmed. "Good morning," she said into the microphone. Her voice was small, but it carried. "My name is Lily Holt, and I am in 3rd grade. 8 months ago, something very frightening happened to me. The auditorium went completely still, in the way that auditoriums only went still when the person at the microphone was saying something the room recognized as true. A man who volunteered at my after-school program tried to take me. He knew my mother's name. He knew where I waited every Thursday. He knew the things about me that he was supposed to use to keep me safe, and he was going to use them the other way instead." She paused. "I had been scared of him for 11 weeks before that day. I told a counselor. I told my mom. The adults I trusted told me I was probably just nervous about something new." She let that sit for a moment. "I was not nervous about something new. My feelings were telling me the truth, and I was right to listen to them even when no one else did." She raised her right hand. "But I did not only listen, I prepared." She demonstrated the signal. Slowly, thumb tucked, 4 fingers folded, 3 seconds. Around the auditorium, 300 children began to follow along, their hands moving in the careful mimicry of the young 300 small signals made at once in the fluorescent light of a school auditorium on a Wednesday morning in August. I learned this 8 months before I needed it, Lily said, from a police officer who came to our school. I practiced it every night in the bathroom mirror because I knew the day was coming when I would need to ask for help without being able to speak. She looked out at the room. On the day that man tried to take me, 11 people walked past me on the courthouse steps. 11 people who were not bad people. 11 people who were busy and distracted and doing the thing that all of us do sometimes, which is to decide that what we think we are seeing is probably not what it looks like. She paused. The 12th person stopped. She found Rook's eyes at the back of the room. He was looking at her with an expression that had moved past professional stillness into something quieter and more complete. Something that was not pride exactly, though it contained pride. Something closer to the feeling of a thing that has been waiting a long time to be the shape it always should have been. He could only help me because I had prepared something he could see, Lily said. She held up her hand again. This is what I gave him. This is how he knew. And this is what I am giving you today. She demonstrated one more time. 300 children followed. Learn this, she said. Practice it. Teach it to the people you love. Because someday you might be the person who needs it. And someday you might be the person who sees it. And if you are the person who sees it, please. She paused. Do not be the 11th person who walks by. Be the 12th person who stops. The applause started slowly and then became something more than applause. It became the sound of a room that had understood something and was responding to that understanding with the only instrument it had. Lily stepped back from the microphone. Her eyes were wet. She did not wipe them. At the back of the auditorium, Rook Callahan gave her one nod, small and complete. The nod of someone who had shown up to witness something and had seen exactly what he came to see. Then he turned and walked out the door, before the applause finished, back into the August morning, back to whatever came next, carrying the day with him, the way he carried all of it, not as weight that broke him, but as weight that reminded him why the work was worth doing. The text from Cade Mercer arrived on a Saturday morning in late September. Rook was on his porch. The coffee was warm. The morning had that particular quality of early autumn, still golden, carrying in it the knowledge that it would not last, but choosing not to apologize for that. The number was unfamiliar. He almost did not open it. Mr. Callahan, this is Cade Mercer. I got your number from Pruitt. I wanted you to know that Vex Corporation agreement went final last week. The two names he gave them have both entered, please. The whole network is done. Rook read the next line slowly. I wanted to tell you something else. Something I have been trying to figure out how to say since February. When I was 16 and I filed that complaint and it disappeared, I spent a long time thinking I had been wrong to speak. That telling the truth had cost me more than staying quiet would have. I spent 3 years building a life in Montana trying to convince myself that what happened in Georgia was not part of me anymore. That I could build something new without going back. He kept reading. But then you called me and told me about a girl who had remembered my name when she was terrified. And I realized something I do not know how to say exactly right. That the reason my name was worth remembering was because I told the truth when I was 16, even though it cost me everything. That the bravery I thought had failed me had actually been waiting to matter. It just needed someone else to pick it up and carry it the rest of the way. She carried it. You made sure it landed. Rook stopped. Read that last sentence again. He understood it was a pronoun error, the kind that happened when someone was writing fast and feeling more than they were editing. He understood Cade meant Lily. He understood what Cade was trying to say. He read the last lines. Tell Lily thank you. Tell her that because of her, I know that speaking up was worth it even the time it was not heard. And tell her I am okay. I am actually okay. I thought she might want to know that. Rook sat with the message for a long time. He opened the folder on his phone, the one labeled Eli. 17 years of entries, messages, and photographs, and case files and clippings, and the particular archaeology of a grief that had learned to move through the world without stopping. He scrolled to the bottom, past the photo of Lily at the assembly podium, past the newspaper clipping from the Harlan Courier about the county-wide safety program the school district had adopted in the fall, past the note from Nora Holt, sent 2 weeks after the courthouse steps, that said, "Only she is doing better." He added Kate's message. Then he sat back and looked at the morning. Eli, March 14th, 2007. He had been looking for his son for 17 years. Not Eli specifically. He understood the difference. He had been looking for the child whose signal nobody saw, the one whose voice was never amplified, the one who was alone on a courthouse step, or in a case file, or in a DCFS waiting room, running out of time and out of options, and needed one person to stop. He had found Lily Holt, and in finding her, he had found the thing he had been moving toward for 17 years without knowing its name. Not healing. Healing did not work the way people described it, as a destination you arrived at if you traveled long enough. What he had found was something quieter and more durable than healing. The understanding that loss could instruct instead of only wound. That grief carried long enough, and honestly enough, became a kind of knowledge. And that knowledge put to use was the closest thing to purpose that Rook Callahan had encountered in 58 years of living. He closed the folder. He started his bike. The engine turned over with the low, definitive sound. It always made the sound of something reliable being asked to do what it was built for. He pulled out onto the county road, and the morning opened up around him. The fields on either side still holding the gold of late summer. The sky overhead doing what September skies did, going the particular shade of blue that made everything under it feel temporary and precious. He did not know where he was going. He knew he was going, because somewhere out there, another child was counting seconds. Another child was practicing something in a bathroom mirror. Another child was carrying the words of a phone call no one had believed them when they reported, waiting for the right person to hand it to. Rook Callahan would keep looking. That was the promise, not redemption. He had stopped reaching for redemption a long time ago. Just presence. Just the choice made again every morning to be the kind of person who stopped on the third step, who went down to eye level, who said the 4 words that cost nothing and changed everything. "I see your signal." 3 years later, in the autumn of 2027, Lily Holt was 11 years old, and she walked into the Harlan County Community Center for the first time since the Thursday she had been taken from its front steps. The room had new paint, new furniture, new director. The previous administration had been investigated thoroughly in the aftermath of the Whitfield case, and what the investigation found had resulted in restructuring significant enough that the community center that existed now shared almost nothing with the one from 3 years ago except its address. Lily was there as a volunteer. The new director had reached out to Nora in September. They were starting a peer mentorship program for younger children. Would Lily be interested? Lily had said yes before her mother finished relaying the question. She sat in the main room on a Tuesday afternoon and waited. The room smelled like new paint and the particular industrial cleaner that community centers everywhere seem to use. And underneath both of those things, faintly the smell of the place itself, of years of children passing through, of the accumulated presence of people who had needed somewhere safe to be. The girl who came in was 7 years old, small with careful eyes and a worn backpack she held in front of her with both hands like a kind of shield. She sat down across from Lily and said nothing for a while, looking at her shoes. Lily recognized the silence. She had worn it herself. "Hi," she said gently. "My name is Lily. I am here on Tuesdays. You can talk to me about anything you want, or we can just sit here. Whatever works for you." The girl looked up. Her name was Emma Hale, and she had been coming to the community center after school since September because her mother worked 2 jobs, and the hours between 3 and 7 had to go somewhere safe. "Do you know the rescue signal?" Emma said. Lily went still for just a moment. Yes, she said, I know it. My teacher taught it to us last month, Emma said. She said a girl at this school made it famous. I did not make it famous, Lily said. I just used it once when I needed it. Emma's eyes went wide. Did it work? Lily smiled. It worked. Emma reached into her backpack. She pulled out a piece of paper and a red crayon and drew something with the focused attention of a child doing something important. Then she held it out to Lily. A sunflower, careful petals, her name in the corner. Emma Hale, age 7. That is on your shoe, Emma said. I noticed when you sat down. Lily looked at the drawing, at the petals, at the careful signature. Can I keep this? She asked. Yeah, Emma said. I made it for you. Lily folded the drawing carefully and put it in her pocket. Next to the laminated photograph she still carried everywhere, the one Nora had had laminated at the public library 3 years ago. Lily at 8 years old, yellow blouse, looking directly at the camera, with the steady measuring attention she had always given to everything. She looked at Emma Hale, 7 years old, sitting across from her, with the worn backpack and the careful eyes and the beginning of a trust that had not yet been tested. Can I teach you something? Lily said. Emma nodded. Lily raised her left hand, the hand that had made the signal 3 times on the courthouse steps. That had pressed flat against the glass of her apartment window as 113 motorcycles pulled away into the September distance. That had rested against her chest in the specific gesture of a child checking to make sure her heart was still beating, and found that it was. She tucked her thumb, folded 4 fingers down, held for 3 seconds. That is the rescue signal, she said. If you are ever scared and you cannot speak, you make this where someone can see it. And if someone ever makes it at you, you stop. Whatever you are doing, wherever you are going, you stop. Emma practiced it, her small hands moving in careful mimicry. How do you know someone will see it? Emma asked. Lily thought about a man on a courthouse step, about a name on a wrist, about grief becoming a kind of knowledge and knowledge becoming a kind of purpose, about a boy in Montana who had told the truth at 16 and waited 3 years for it to matter, about a woman of 71 who had finally chosen the thing she should have chosen the first time. You cannot know for certain, she said honestly, but you practice it anyway, because the one time it works is worth every time it does not, and because every person you teach it to is one more person who might be looking. Emma nodded, serious and certain in the way that 7-year-olds were serious and certain when they understood something that mattered. Outside, the autumn afternoon was doing what autumn afternoons did in Harlan County, going gold and quiet and briefly perfect before the dark came in. Cars moved past the center's windows. A bus stopped at the corner, the ordinary world continuing its ordinary business. Inside, 2 girls sat across from each other, one 11 and one 7. And one of them taught the other the thing that had saved her life, and the other learned it with the full open attention of someone who understood already, in the quiet place beneath words where children understood things, that this was not a lesson about signals. It was a lesson about seeing, about being seen, about the choice made again and again by ordinary people in ordinary moments to stop walking and look and ask the question that cost nothing and sometimes changed everything. Lily Holt had been the terrified 8-year-old on the courthouse steps. She had been the girl that 11 people walked past. She had been the child who practiced in the bathroom mirror because she understood that preparation was the only power available to her, and she had been right. Now she was the 12th person, and she was teaching someone else to be.